What's your take on it all?
Well, I think the first thing to say is that everybody in this country, I would hope, would condemn the violence and the disorder that's taking place. If you're idiotic enough to be destroying your own local community, to be using violence, and you deserve to feel the full force of the law. I think at the same time, it is also true that Keir Starmer and the Labour government, from my perspective, have managed this very badly so far. I would have liked to have seen Keir Starmer and Labour come out forcefully and condemn violence on all sides. I would have liked to have seen them talk less about far-right thuggery and a lot more about disorder and criminality. I think for many people out there, the response looks very one-sided. And I would like to have seen us move on to have a bit more of a mature conversation about what is really driving a lot of this unrest. Keir Starmer, in his statement this evening, says, whatever the motivation, this is not protest, it is violence. Actually, I think for lots of people out there, what is happening is protest. I think they're protesting about illegal migration, the collapse of our borders. I think they're protesting about being lied to by British people on when it comes to legal migration. They've had 14 years of governments and parties promising them reductions. And I think they're protesting about an elite class in this country that doesn't seem to want to keep them safe in their own country. And I think that's where this tragedy has become a lightning rod for that underlying sentiment. So I'd like to see a lot of changes, Michelle.
We're going to discuss a lot of that in more detail as the programme progresses, and I will show you in a few minutes some clips of Keir Starmer in case you missed it. But James, just top level, your overall response to it all?
It's been absolutely horrifying to see, and to see what I think the country that most of us would recognise, which is what you just showed us from the vigil in Southport, and that horror being turned into and used for racist, targeted violence that we have seen. I mean, yes, there's criminality and looting, but there have been directed attacks on people because of their skin colour and because of their religion, which is not something that we should be seeing in any country, and it should not be happening here in Britain. I think that the government has been a bit slow in a number of ways. I think slow in the way it speaks. I think a lot more effort should have happened earlier on to reassure people who are being directly targeted or could be directly targeted by these racist attacks that those are not British values and that the public sides with them. And I think also to be much clearer, like these are organised, these are political, and they are racist. You may not like the term far right. We can have a semantic discussion if we want. We probably shouldn't. But if people are being dragged out of their car because of the colour of their skin, or or hotels housing migrants are set on fire, these are racist attacks, and that is the character of them, and we should call them out. Of course, there are things that could have happened faster, it seems, with policing. It seems like the police in Southport on Tuesday night were totally overwhelmed, and things should have moved faster, given that these are not spontaneous uprisings of people. These are organised, there are social media channels, there are Telegram channels, these are announced protests, and so we need the policing to catch up with that level of organisation that we're seeing.
Shall I just take a moment then, in case anyone hasn't seen some of the response to it then? So Keir Starmer, he addressed the nation. This was yesterday. Let's remind ourselves what he was saying yesterday.
I won't shy away from calling it what it is. Far-right thuggery. To those who feel targeted because of the colour of your skin or your faith, I know how frightening this must be. I want you to know that this violent mob do not represent our country, and we will bring them to justice.
And, of course, there's been an emergency Cobra meeting today. Let's look at how Keir Starmer addressed the nation after that as well.
There are a number of actions that came out of the meeting. The first is we will have a standing army of specialist officers, public duty officers, so that we'll have enough officers to deal with this where we need them. The second is we'll ramp up criminal justice. There have already been hundreds of arrests. Some have appeared in court this morning. I've asked for early consideration of the earliest naming and identification of those involved in the process.
So that's Keir Starmer there. How do you think he's responding to it? How would you rate his response?
I think he looks slow. I agree with James. I think they could have moved a lot faster. I think he and Yvette Cooper, I think, have been outflanked by events. They look like they're catching up, not ahead of the events. And I think, look, as I say, I think lots of people in this country perceive the response to be somewhat one-sided because I don't think it is just about far-right thuggery. The clips that I've seen on social media, there's an element of that among a minority, for sure. But I think I've also seen gangs of organised Muslim mobs storming around streets with weapons, attacking people, again, because of their race, because they're white. I've seen some horrific instances of ethnic conflict clearly playing out on Britain's streets, people fighting on the basis of race and religion. And at the root of this, Michelle, is the fact, that what we're seeing really is a demonstration of how our model of multiculturalism just isn't working. And we've had this debate on and off now for 20 years. But I think this is going to be a game changer in that you can't really look at Britain now and say, well, this model of multiculturalism is working. I was in Hungary for the last 4 days at a conference. Very conservative country, mocked by elites around the world. It was stable, secure, didn't see any illegal migration, didn't see any chaos, didn't see any unrest. I arrived back in the UK last night. And the country looked like it was completely out of control. And to be frank, the government looked like it had lost control of the country. So we need, I think, a more even-handed approach, both from Starmer and Yvette Cooper. She should be on the TV this morning, when she was interviewed by her husband on GBNews. On Good Morning Britain. She should be out there saying, this isn't just about one group, this is about everybody. And that too applies to policing, which I know we'll come and talk about. But there's a sense out there in Britain, a sense of unfairness, that the institutions are leaning one way and not dealing with everybody fairly and evenly. And I do think that's contributing to this.
Do you agree with that?
No, not at all. I think if you take this false perception of two-tier policing, I watched a Tommy Robinson video yesterday from his Cypriot redoubt after his workout, and he was saying exactly the same sorts of things that you are saying, Matt. And the reason why people have a false impression that, as Tommy Robinson was saying, we've had 9 months of jihadist marches in London, which is a nonsense, but has been peddled from the top of our politics and the top of our media. We had Suella Braverman as Home Secretary saying that the Islamists are now in charge, that London is a no-go zone, that there are weekly hate marches, all of which was objectively nonsense.
Not if you're Jewish.
But, that's also absolutely not the case. Those are not threatening marches for Jewish people, having been on them as a Jewish person with the Jewish bloc many times.
But hold on, a lot of Jewish people are, just because you're not frightened, and that's great, a lot of Jewish people are frightened by them.
Can I ask you just one question about two-tier policing?
Sure.
Because this is what I'd like someone on the left of politics to answer this for me. So when Keir Starmer, after the Black Lives Matter protests, came out, rushed, I would argue, after nearly 30 police officers had been injured, after mass disruption, desecration of national monuments, and he came out and he did the video saying, I'm taking the knee, I'm showing solidarity with BLM. Why is that okay? That's acceptable. And we also had a conversation at the time saying BLM protests reflect legitimate grievances in minority communities. Why is that acceptable? But when it comes to these protests, we're not able to say, well, these protests reflect wider grievances, and Starmer's approach is so different from what it was with the BLM protests. Just from the left perspective, I really want to understand this. Why can I see this asymmetry?
Well, I imagine it's because you want to see it, but I'm very clearly not a spokesperson for Keir Starmer, but he is not he's not a policeman when he's coming out and he's saying that the Black Lives Matter relate to grievances over police violence and racism in this country, whereas attacking and setting fire to a hotel, terrorising people, setting out roadblocks and asking people if they are white, pulling people out of cars in organised violence. This is not a protest against an injustice. This is a got-up, racist, political movement, got up by large sections of our media and our politics, who like to push the sorts of lines that you're pushing about how this is a natural reflection of the failures of multiculturalism or whatever it has, when actually what we see in our society, for the vast majority of our society, is communities coming together, people living with their neighbours, things like we're seeing in Southport. What we see from that other side, from the racist end of politics, is turning tragedy into more tragedy.
So the BLM injustice is legitimate and other injustices are not, essentially, is the difference.
Well, I'm saying that there isn't an injustice about having people of other skin colours and religions in the country in which you live.
I would say many Brits who have experienced, for example, widespread sexual exploitation of young white girls across northern towns, I'd say that's a legitimate injustice.
I do not... So you think it's a legitimate injustice to have black and brown, Muslim, Hindu, whatever it would be, people living in our country? You think that is an injustice? That's
not what I said at all. I said if you're living in a town like Rotherham, which has had disturbances, where 1,400 young girls were systematically raped, sexually assaulted and subjected to horrific abuse, that is an injustice. You would agree with that. I think everyone in this country, I would hope, would agree with that.
Of course.
So we can't look at a protest like BLM, which caused massive unrest and violence across the West, and Keir Starmer, after that massive violence and unrest, came out and said, I align myself with BLM, and then look at these protests and treat them in such a different way. I don't think that is acceptable.
They are in no way comparable. Let's take, for example, the scale of violence that we've seen. They are in no way comparable.
BLM in the US took over entire cities.
We're talking about the UK, though.
No, but it was very evident when Keir Starmer aligned himself with BLM that they'd already caused mass chaos in the United States after the murder of George Floyd.
We're talking...
And in the UK.
We don't have these things going on in the US, so let's stick to the...
Well, he made a political decision, didn't he?
Fine.
To align himself with BLM.